thanks for being with me. This is an important live feed, and I hope that there are a number of you that choose to come on board to have a conversation with me about the issues of the day, and particularly the issue today, which is about the United States bombing Iran. And what does that mean to us? What does that mean to the rest of the world? And more importantly, I'm going to have a look at how the rest of the world is going to respond in relation to what has just happened. Now, I'm going to give my own personal opinion, which is normally what I do on my show, but I'm going to talk to you, I think, about the greater implications of the United States becoming involved, why they became involved, and what it is that we think and we can assume is happening between that vacuous thing called the Donald Trump brain that makes us wonder why he did this all in the first place. Now, I think we need to start at the beginning, which is really whether or not Iran has the potential to build a nuclear weapon. And I think we need to accept the fact that perhaps they do, that this is a reality, that they could have developed a nuclear bomb. Does that really matter to the rest of us? And do we need to look at this in perspective in terms of, what countries at the moment do have nuclear weapons? How have they come to acquire those nuclear weapons? Who controls the stock of nuclear weapons around the world? And whether or not we've done anything in the past to, limit the amount of weapons that are available. And I just want to take us to this particular, this particular screen here, which indicates to us, I think, that and is a good starting point to recognise that the United States they have a lot of nuclear warheads in the United States. The United Kingdom has some, France has some as well, Israel has some, Pakistan has a lot, I think, India has a lot, probably to match Pakistan, and Russia has a bucket load, far more than the United States do. In fact, China has a fair few, and of course, North Korea. And the question we need to be asking ourselves at this particular point is, why do all these countries need nuclear weapons? Well, I'll come back to this particular one, because down here it talks a little bit more about why this is the case. So at the dawn of the nuclear age, the United States hoped to maintain a monopoly on its new weapon, but the secrets and the technologies for building the atomic bomb soon spread. The United States conducted its first nuclear test explosion in July 1945, and of course they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. Just 4 years later, the Soviet Union had one, United Kingdom in 1952, France in 1960, China in 1964. So there's this race to have these nuclear weapons at one particular point. India, Israel and Pakistan never signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty and possessed nuclear arsenals. So all of these other countries, though, signed a Non-Proliferation Treaty saying they wouldn't arm any further than what they were. So what I'm going to ask you to do is I want people to make comment on where you stand in relation to any of this. Whether you think that it was appropriate for Trump to bomb those sites in Iran, number one. Number two, do you think that this is likely to head towards a further war around the world? Whether the Middle East is now going to explode and the United States is going to be attacked by Iran. Now, to be fair, I think Iran at this point has said that there will be some sort of repercussion, but they are looking at limiting and restricting the ships that flow through and past them, and hopefully that will not mean that there will be any major conflict. It will just affect the supply of oil around the world, and I guess to some extent that will impact most of us. So let us know. I'm just interested to know what you think around all of this and whether or not Australia should get involved. Now, the other question, of course, is Australia already involved in all of this? Now, Albanese has come out and he's made some statements. I've got a statement direct from him in a moment, which I'll share with you. But Albanese says Australia has given its support to US strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, but has repeated calls for de-escalation to avoid a wider war. Penny Wong said Australia has not received a request for assistance and declined to speculate how any request would be met. Australia has given its support to US strikes on Ukrainian nuclear facilities, but has repeated calls for de-escalation to avoid a wider war. And there's an article I looked up also, which was the world leaders' reactions to this. And I'm going to have to find a way to shrink that for you. So during the Trump address, so just I just want to go through what the rest of the world is saying, because I think it's really important for us all to understand what the world generally is saying. Some of these countries are quite meaningless and probably not as significant as others. For example, Argentina says that the right-wing ally of Trump in Latin America is yet to comment about it. And he says that today is a great day for Western civilization. Australia, which I'll go through in just a moment. Canada, Prime Minister Mark Carney reiterated Trump's belief that Iran can never be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. And when we look through a lot of these, you'll see the same. China strongly condemns, of course, what has happened. Czechia has said that the country supported the US strikes, called for an understanding effort to prevent Tehran from developing nuclear weapons. India has said on social media that he spoke with Iran's president after US strikes. Modi reported that he reiterated India's call for immediate de-escalation. The European Commission, this is an important one in particular, the negotiating table is the only place to end this crisis. France has said the European countries reiterated its firm opposition to Iran gaining access to nuclear weapons, but also urged both parties to exercise restraint. France is convinced that a lasting solution to this issue requires a negotiated solution within the framework of the Treaty of Non-Proliferation. We remain ready to contribute to the in conjunction with our partners. Germany, today I discussed the latest development in the Middle East with Starmer and Macron. We affirm our commitment to peace and stability to all countries. So the essence in what all of these people are saying, of course, Iran come up and say, well, it's atrocious what they've done. Fair enough. We can expect their response to be whatever it is. But please, I'd be interested to know that what you think about any of this. And I noticed that these already commenters saying that no, I don't think Australia should get involved. Australia's already got involved because they operate Pine Gap, and people have gathered information, or the rest of the Americans gather information via Pine Gap. So we're already involved in this war. But what do we think is likely to happen in the future? Who knows? However, I do have just a bit of a quote here from Albanese, and I'll have a response to that after we've had a discussion.
The world has long agreed that Iran cannot be allowed to get a nuclear weapon, and we support action to prevent that. That is what this is. The US action was directed at specific sites central to Iran's nuclear program. We don't want escalation and a full-scale war. We continue to call for dialogue and for diplomacy. As I've said for many days now, we are deeply concerned about any escalation in the region, and we want to see diplomacy, dialogue and de-escalation. We've been upfront about the challenge facing the international community, that is, dealing with the threat posed by any Iranian nuclear weapons program and dealing with the risk of regional escalation. And that's why Australia called...
So that's the theme. The theme now is that we want to play safe. So we've bombed a country. We haven't attacked the main people within the country, apart from these sites. We being the United States. Heaven forbid that I associate the we with Australia and the United States. But nevertheless, the issue is that the United States has now decided to bomb these sites, and that Tehran are expecting Tehran to do nothing. They're expecting Tehran to go back, and the rest of the world is saying exactly the same thing, that we're expecting Iran, to go back to the table and to start to discuss ways by which they can distribute or prevent themselves, that they can be stopped from carrying forward their progress in relation to developing a nuclear weapon. Now, the other issue that comes up, which we also need to discuss, is whether or not, because of all of this, that the bombing has actually created any harm whatsoever to Iran. Whether or not the Iranians have been able to remove all the material that was used for creating their weapon program, whether the material that they had stored had been shifted from wherever they were originally in these places that were bombed by the United States. Now that remains unknown, even though the United States are claiming at this particular point that this devastated the region. Well, they might have bombed something, but whether or not they've actually affected them to the point whereby they can't enrich uranium anymore remains to be seen. This is another issue entirely. The sound is very low, Tony. Sorry about that. I could try and increase that as best I could, and I think it might have been low, particularly when I was playing the video off the other thing, but we'll just turn that up and see whether that works. I'll bring the microphone closer to me. So thanks, Ash. I appreciate you for letting me know. And that's the thing when you do a live feed, sometimes you don't know, whereas when I do other feeds, it sometimes makes it a little bit different. So I think the point here is that we can do whatever we can to better understand what's happening in around the world, and particularly what are our next steps here in relation to this. Now, there are some interesting statements that have been made by others, and one I found here that was quite interesting, which was from, if I can just find it, from Jeffrey Robertson. Now, Jeffrey made some really interesting points here around the fact that the United States, particularly Trump, has broken some international laws. Now, Trump breaks laws like they're just going out of style, the man doesn't care, doesn't give a shit about what the international laws say or even what the local laws say. So he has busily gone ahead and broken subsequent laws. And this is what Jeffrey Robertson has to say. Although few bothered to point it out, Donald Trump has just committed a crime much worse than all the others on his rap sheet. It is the war crime of aggression, the supreme war crime, according to the judgment at Nuremberg. It is constituted by using armed force against a fellow United Nations member with such character, gravity and scale that it manifestly violates the UN Charter prohibition on one member country attacking another. And just on this point, there is an argument now that the United States, and Trump in particular, are playing less and less significance to international law, and that the United Nations, therefore, subsequently, is becoming more and more irrelevant. And we need to keep in mind that this has been an aim of Donald Trump for decades now, that his belief was that the United Nations was a toothless tiger, that it accomplished nothing, did nothing, and certainly, I guess because it didn't recognise him as being the great leader that he thinks he is, that it has then sort of diminished in his view. Now, he has been attacking the World Health Organization, UNESCO, any other arm of the United Nations that does fabulous work, that reports around the world about what's happening in the most poverty-stricken countries in the world, and he doesn't like that. So he's wanted to diminish the power of the United Nations. And of course, in the Security Council with China and Russia sitting in the Security Council and the other seats rotating, has meant often that the United Nations doesn't get what the majority want because of the structure of the Security Council. So Robertson goes on to say, though, spectacular military success, which is the quote, the bumper bombing of Iran's nuclear facilities may have been, but it was, as a matter of international law, no different from Russian President Vladimir Putin's attack on Ukraine. And I think this is a really interesting point. No different from Russian President of Ukraine or the George W. Bush, Tony Blair, John Howard invasion of Iraq. These are all cases of a fundamental breach of the world order agreed after the last war and likely to encourage emulation. Next stop, Taiwan. This is not about saving Iran or the danger of making Putin look better. If any government in the world deserves to be destroyed, it is the mullahs without mercy in Iran. Many of them were involved in the mass slaughter of political prisoners in 1988, the worst crime against helpless POWs since the Japanese death marches. And ever since, their record of killing peaceful protesters, women and dissidents by hanging and shooting has been disgusting. Iran has bankrolled terrorist organisations and waged propaganda wars against the big US and the UK Satan, but has not invaded Israel or done anything to America to justify its aggression. This is really interesting stuff because, I mean, this man is a lawyer of the highest possible order and worked with the ICC. And so he understands his stuff and he understands the political implications of all of this, and also he understands where Iran comes from historically, where some hypothetical war crimes court ever to get its hands on Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, it would reduce his sentence by taking Iranian provocation into account. But the man would still be guilty as charged. He could not argue self-defence, which requires the threat defended against to be reasonably proximate. The threat of Iran building and using nukes is much further away from the threat of Israel's submarines, said to be already stationed within range of Tehran, rising to strike. It is not even clear that Iran is close to building a nuclear weapon. Now, this is the point. So we can look at the atrocities that Iran has contributed over the years. We can be appalled at their behaviour. But does that justify the bombing as we saw on the weekend? Does it justify that? I'll be really interested to know what your comments are. I'd really be interested to know what your comments are. He goes on to say, Iran is not very clear that it is not even clear that Iran is close to building a nuclear weapon. Several dozen countries also signed to the Nuclear Weapons Treaty, by which they forswear and such development could build nukes within a few months. The National Atomic Energy Agency has been blown the whistle in any definitive way, as claimed by the Australian government, and nor has the UK or our European allies. And just like Saddam Hussein's mythical weapons of mass destruction, and this is the issue, there is no reason to think Iran has completed a project that was, in fact, started under the Shah in the 1970s. Interesting, haven't thought of that before. Only last week, in the tone of an American gangster, Trump said, in effort to Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, "We know where you live," but he promised the cleric he would be safe for now and gave him 2 weeks. He bombed 3 days later. This is a man on whose word Australia has just made a massive down payment for AUKUS. And I think that's an important point. So, Diaz said, what could be the reason for Iran not being allowed nuclear weapons? Or racism, she says, and possibly so. So we also have another article which says how Trump obliterated the best laid plans of world's most powerful military alliance. And this one's quite interesting because this particular article I'm about to show you is about NATO. Now, there is a meeting in NATO this week. Trump was expected to go to this meeting. As a result, the meeting was really kind of, as you'll see in this article, watered down, primarily because they were acquiescing to Trump's desires, his whims and his fancies. And so we have this particular article where NATO wanted this week's summit to be relatively boring, a controversy-free meeting, a bland communique, and a polished photo op to show unity. What it's getting instead is a flashpoint, one lit by the United States itself, which brings us to that issue about Trump always wanting to be the centre of attention, always wanting to be important, always wanting to be recognised, always wanting to be identified. I've got some statements here in the moment that people have been making on the comments section. I'll get to those in just a moment. I'll just kind of finish with this one, I think. Just days before 32 NATO leaders descend on the Netherlands, the world's most powerful military alliance is watching its agenda be torched by a fresh theatre of war, Iran. and not just Israeli warplanes this time, but American ones too. In a stunning military escalation, as force joined Israel in bombing Iran's most fortified nuclear sites, including the Fatah and so on, we know all about that. Donald Trump's message was blunt, obliterated. And just like that, the fragile choreography of what might have been NATO's most controversial summit in its 76-year history, carefully designed to hide its internal fractures, has been blown off course. The summit was never supposed to be about Iran or even Ukraine, for that matter. So, and this was the effort for NATO to acquiesce to the desires of Donald Trump. So the dilemma for me, and I wonder whether this is also the case with you, is that if this escalates into a further conflict, something outside of just stopping or ceasing the flow of oil, and it becomes something more significant, such as Iran choosing to bomb some of the military bases in and around the Middle East that is occupied by the United States, or if there are some terrorists, some sleeper cells in the United States that come into action and they cause havoc in the US, has the bombing been worthwhile? Is it, it's like we're waiting, it's like the calm before the storm. We're waiting to see now what happens. We're all anxious, I think, and I feel anxious for the rest of the world, that this could develop into something far more significant. And what does this do to Donald Trump's emphatic statements in relation to he was to be the peacemaker, that he is the deal maker, that there will be no more wars under him? Can we at this point say that this is a war? Israel and Iran are still battling it out. Iran is still dropping bombs on Tel Aviv. That hasn't ceased. Ukraine is still battling with Russia. Israel is still bombing the shit out of Gaza. And now we have this escalating event in Iran. And so the great peacemaker, namely Donald Trump, is far from that. So I'm just going to answer just have a look at some of your questions now, and so I don't know about that one. So someone said, do you think this is a US chance to use a nuke to intimidate China and Russia? That's an interesting question in itself. I was thinking about this earlier today, and I was thinking, does China, forget about Russia for a moment, Russia has decided actually that it wants to be the mediator in this particular conflict, which makes you think that Putin must understand that there's something in this for him as well, because one thing's for sure, Putin doesn't know how to be a peacemaker. He only knows how to create havoc, and he must believe that there's something. And he's supported Iran over the years, regardless of the horrible things that Iran has done. So who knows where that's going to go. But China, China has been able to develop itself as an industrial power. It hasn't had to take over another country. It hasn't had to dominate militarily. The United States still has the largest force in the world, even though I think that the Navy in China has grown exponentially over the years and has become more and more powerful. But does China need to? No, don't think so. And when I was reflecting on this, I reflected back a little bit to Japan after the war and Germany. I mean, they became industrial power forces after the war because the United States helped them to rebuild. That's one thing, right? Good for the United States. But it was good for the US to do that. It wasn't just them being extremely helpful and understanding how it was for those people in that country that they'd run havoc over. Particularly, I think guilt about Hiroshima and Nagasaki probably played a part. But nevertheless, those countries were able to rebuild independently also and become powerful industrial nations as a result. So does that likely to mean that it's likely to intimidate China or Russia? Don't think so. So it says here, do you think this is US chance to use a nuke? No, that's the other thing. And now thanks for raising that. One of the interesting things I think too is that what does it mean to use a nuke? Okay, we'll just come back to this particular picture right here. In the last 80 years, a nuke has not been used, even though many of the countries soon after the war ended, World War II ended, did develop a nuclear powerhouse. Now, the fact that North Korea, a small country that is poverty-stricken, that is run by also a crazy man, has not used a nuke to attack another country, must tell us something. The fact that these countries develop nuclear warheads tells us, I think, that nuclear warheads are a deterrent. I was going to say detergent, which makes me wonder. But they are deterrent. So to have nuclear power doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be used. But what it does mean is that it may prevent other people from attacking you. And maybe we ought to have thought about Iran having their own nuclear weapon just so that they could have felt more safe and secure. Because North Korea could have been attacked a long time ago without nuclear. It's only the nuclear weapons that they've developed that has prevented all of that, I would think, to a large extent. I'm sure there's more complicated reasons than just that, but I'm sure that has something to do with it. So having nuclear weapons necessarily, the question really there, is it a bad thing or is it not? So someone's posted something else here, which I'll try and bring up. So I'll just move this over so I can see it. What's your thoughts on denuclearisation? Do you think it's possible still, or would it be better if everybody had one to assure everyone has a stake at mutually assured destruction? Well, that was kind of a response to what I was just saying. I think that basically I believe that. I'll just bring it back up. I believe that it does act as a deterrent from other people attacking you, because you have the power to destroy them in the most horrific, horrifying, destructive way imaginable. And also, you've got to think that if you're going to drop a bomb, the chances are that it's going to devastate not just you but the rest of the world. And is really the question remains: is there any leader that's crazy enough to do just that? I don't know. I don't know if there is. So some of the other things that people are saying here is, so Aussie Nebula, bring that one up, says, hey Tony, great to chat. In my opinion, Trump has been goaded into this and now can't lose face. So he will lie to protect his goof. This is true. You can see all the MAGAs that were against war are now on side with him, and that's another issue, because also it's divided the MAGA movement. So we've got the Bannons of this world and the Marjorie Taylor Greens, who are all saying, "Oh, this is horrible because you promised us that you wouldn't go to war." And now he is going to, well, not to war in that strictest sense, but he has attacked another country. And they can see where this is going. And they're not happy with it. So people like Tucker Carlson are rallying against the Trump administration. So just have a look at his interview with Cruz the other day, and you can see that there are aspects of the right wing, the extreme right, the MAGA movement, who are unhappy with some of the things that Trump's doing and happy with some of those people that support him. So it's taking a turn, I think, for the worst. So just going through some of these again. He avoided the US consultation without vote from Congress. We'll bring that up because that's another excellent point. So thanks for mentioning that. So he violated the US consultation. And that's the point I made before, is that there's no way in the world Trump understands geopolitical issues. He hasn't got an interest, I don't think, in anything to do with the rule of law. He's only interested in what this can produce for him, which is more power, more influence, and ultimately for Trump, more money, because this is what it is. It's about dipping your snout in the trough so you can gain as many goodies as you can. One wonders what goodies he's going to gain from this. But also, who encouraged him to do this? What hawk was behind him in order to make this move? My guess is the person most responsible for this is Netanyahu himself. And the need to be able to keep on side, I guess, with the Jewish element in the United States. Not necessarily the religious side, but the Israelis in particular. Because there are lots of Jewish people who disagree with what's happening in Gaza. There's a lot of Jewish people that would disagree with what's happening in Israel in terms of the decisions the government has made. So what other thoughts do you have? I'd love to hear from you. And I would also like to think... Oh, someone's posted. This is an interesting one. I love the image. Why do you think Israel gets blanket immunity for everything? That's a really good question. Israel, this has got that we should do. I'd love to have a conversation with someone who's got some in-depth understanding about the history in relation to Israel and the involvement of the British in terms of setting aside the land for Israel and the Palestinians, and how they used to live together harmoniously. And then suddenly they became, as the Israeli government took over and had more and more power and influence and took more and more land off the Palestinians, that they became more and more prominent. And they were given more and more from the United States. They were given the weapons and so forth. They were given more opportunities economically and militarily, and they developed a network, in fact, of military power and authority in the Middle East based on the United States providing them with the goods that they needed to do so. So they have developed that influence and that power in the Middle East. And they're the only country in the Middle East, primarily, apart from perhaps Saudi Arabia, who are prepared to work with the United States to maintain some sort of stability, which means the continual flow of a thing that the United States is most interested in, and that's oil. So that is the reason, I think, why Israel is the place that they are and why they get away with so much, because they are the only nation in that area that are basically non-Muslim, which therefore brings in this racist tendency, I guess, for it, and that the United States see them as an opportunity to be able to provide the United States with the goods that they need. I think that probably is my explanation of that, but others may have a different explanation altogether. And Sean says, Israel has lobbyists everywhere, and that's so true. So let me know further what you think. Someone says, no one has invaded North Korea. True. And I'm asking, why is that the case? And I guess the reason is because they have a nuclear weapon. And also, it depends on what happens. It depends on the way you look at the Korean War and why that they developed the DMZ and why the South weren't able to take over and the Americans weren't able to win that war. And the other issue which I think needs to be discussed, is why it is that the United States has since, and they didn't win World War II, incidentally, even though that's what Trump said the other day. It was the Allies that won World War II, and it was the resistance in France, and it was the British, and it was the Australians and the New Zealanders and a whole lot of other countries that were involved. Even though the United States liked to think that they won it, they didn't. They helped, but they didn't win it. And the droppings of the bombs did not stop the war, it just stopped the Pacific War, incidentally. But the issue, I guess, is that countries, I've forgotten actually, to be quite honest, I've forgotten, I was answering one of these questions, which I've forgotten what it was. So, someone says, Trump is a lunatic, we need regime change. I like that. I might use that as a theme, actually. So, thanks for that. Let's slide through. I appreciate that. That was the post. No, that's the wrong one. And it's not working at the moment. So, let me know what you think. Now, what should Australia's involvement be? This is an issue that sort of is worrying and concerning me. Penny Wong has become a great disappointment. Why isn't it that we couldn't just turn around and say that it needed to be negotiated and that I don't agree with bombing another country? Why can't we say it's against international law? That they did the wrong thing, hold them accountable for it, because who's going to hold them accountable when if the war spreads to other regions, or if the United States does get involved, or if the United States itself, through terrorists, becomes attacked? Who's going to take? See, what happens is they're just going to blame everybody else. Like the United States, under Trump, under anybody for that matter, will not take responsibility for anything that happens as a consequence of their behaviour. They will not take responsibility. They will actually find ways to blame others for whatever is happening. And it's wrong. Because right at this particular point in time, countries like Australia and European countries and Great Britain and so on should be saying, you did the wrong thing. We hope that you can now negotiate some sort of a peace. But if something flows from this as a result of your action, you are responsible. We are not going to get involved with you. We refuse to participate in this particular war because I am fearful that at the end of the day, the United States will say to Australia, you got AUKUS. We'll just take your money on AUKUS and we'll disappear with that money because we're not going to provide you with the submarines that you say that you want. We're not going to support you in the Pacific region anymore. We're just going to withdraw. You're on your own. So they will blackmail us to participate in a war that our government will not have the courage to say we don't want to be involved in. That is my concern. That at the end of the day, yeah, that's right. So Sean just said, if Australia doesn't follow suit, no submarines. And maybe that's not a bad thing either. But at one particular point, a country has to say, you know, it can't be just China and Russia and North Korea. But some of the westernised countries have to say this is wrong. Where's the moral standing around any of this? Why don't you take on some sort of moral principle that invading, and the principle is this: unilaterally invading another country is wrong. It is simply wrong. It is their jurisdiction. You know, and if there is a response, and that response is deadly, and means that tens of thousands of people will be killed. You know, you just look at Iran. Sorry, just look at Iraq. Now, the reality there was that there were no weapons of mass destruction. In the same way that there may not be any any development of nuclear weapons in Iran, because no one knows. Are we being conned again? You know, and did Bush and the Brits, you know, did they, and Australia for that matter, so many countries were dragged into that mire of crap and destruction. And as a result of that, 200,000 Iraqis were killed. So we're going to see the same thing again. Are we going to see a population of 92 million people be wiped out in a sense, just like Gaza, because it's what Netanyahu wants? You know? Are we going to watch so many innocent people die simply because an American president wanted to demonstrate to the world how powerful he was and that he wanted to suck up to a small nation like Israel? At the end of the day, is that what this is all about? I hope not. But we need to keep ourselves, I think we need to keep vigilant around all of this, and we need to acknowledge that I think, that Australia are giving the wrong messages back to the United States and to the world, and that we have a chance to stand alone around all of this and to say what we need to say and hopefully bring about appropriate and significant change. Well, thanks everybody. There's quite a few people that have come online, so I really thank you for that. And I appreciate you helping my channel as well. And can you please subscribe to my channel? Ring the bell for further notifications. Let me know what you think about anything that we talk about. There'll be lots of discussions around this issue as more and more information comes to light over the coming weeks. Thanks everybody. Take care, look after yourself, and more importantly, keep you and the people that you love safe.